Back into school soon for most of us. Exciting times. As we're going to be back in, I thought it was good to spend a little bit of time thinking about what social distancing actually means. Hopefully you've all been practicing it. Here's a special image for geographers. 2 meters is a ranging pole. It's 1.1 to David Attenborough's. It's 0.16 seconds of latitude. It's 0.008 on a 1 to 25,000 scale OS map. It's 2/5 of a contour line, or 1/5 of a contour line in a mountainous area. And it's approximately 1/10 the drop of high force waterfall on the River Tees. If at any point you're unsure, remember back to this and stay 2 meters away from the other students in school. Link to the Do Now quiz is on ePraise or in the description. Pause here and get it done. Answers already on there. So some feedback on that top quality 6 marker that you were asked to do last week. It was addressing the efficacy, how effective the Cumbria Flood Action Plan was. I'm going to start with Harvey because he's a big boy and he can handle a little bit of criticism. There's some good stuff in here, but there's a lot that needs to be better, and I think it's going to be worth him and possibly others of you going back and having a go at redoing some of these paragraphs or potentially the whole thing. First off, Harvey doesn't mention the plan specifically. That's going to really limit the number of marks he can get. He needs to mention specifically the Cumbria Flood Action Plan. He makes a good point. If you don't have access to a phone or social media, that particular strategy won't be effective, but he doesn't explain what that strategy actually is, the warning system. So it lacks that specific detail needed for higher level marks. And then the second section, where he should be giving an explanation of something that is effective about the plan, he actually just starts talking about what they should be doing. It's not asking you to suggest ways to manage flooding, it's asking you to judge the efficacy, how effective what they actually did was. So the final part of his answer just doesn't address the question. This needs to be better, but Harvey's definitely a student who's capable of making it better. Moving on, Phoebe's is better. The example is given, the efficacy is quantified. She's saying it's mostly effective, which is great. Sets her up for 2 paragraphs there, one to say it's effective, one to say it's ineffective, which is what she does. There is specific knowledge. 49 kilometers long, not tall, but there's an attempt at specific knowledge there, and the 2,000 trees being planted, that's good. The second paragraph is contrasting with the first paragraph, which is great, and there's a good conclusion that matches the overall argument. So this gets those things right, and we'll be picking up more marks than the first example we've just seen. Hannah, another good example, key terms used throughout, and that's great. Dredging, capacity, rainfall, all of this, really good. The strategy is explained really clearly, and what I liked particularly about this was down at the bottom, spoke about damage to ecosystems, but specified species such as salmon. That makes it level 3 knowledge to have that level of specificity. And then lastly, Kai, excellent structure, chains of reasoning developed in a huge amount of detail, which is fantastic. 2 things. First thing, there's no clear conclusion at the bottom. If you look at the 2 previous examples, there was a clear conclusion there which guarantees that you can access full marks. It doesn't mean you're going to get full marks, but you can access full marks. Kai hasn't included a conclusion, so the most he can get is 5. So that needs to be improved. The only other thing I question with Kai is, because it is generally very, very good, is timing. Kai, feel free to chuck me a message on ePraise Messenger. Let me know how long that took you. I'd be interested to know. So we're going to move on. We're looking at the UK Physical Landscapes Unit. We've looked at rivers. We've covered rivers in a reasonable degree of detail. We'll have to go back over it when we get back into school, but we've covered what we need to know. We're now going to move on and we're going to look at the second part of this unit, which is looking at coasts. And we're going to start by looking at some of the key things which change our coast and affect our coast, and we're going to begin by looking at waves. Now hopefully this taps into some of the work you've done in science, and it's got some similar key terms there that you'd use in science in terms of wavelength and wave height. The waves that hit our coastline, there's an image there showing it, and it's hopefully something that you've all seen. There is a gap between waves known as the wavelength. The height of each wave is known as the wave height. The thing that we're adding in here, because we're talking geographically, is prevailing wind. Remember, prevailing wind is the direction that winds typically come from in an area. For the UK, our winds are westerlies. They come from the west and travel towards the east. The prevailing wind influences the direction that waves approach or attack the coastline. So prevailing wind is really important because that controls the direction of the waves that hit the UK. Waves are caused by the friction of the wind moving across the surface of the water, and that's what causes waves to start to build. But they break because as they approach the coastline and as the depth of water decreases, as the sea gets shallower, there is friction between the water and the sea bed. That friction causes the bottom of the wave to slow down. Meanwhile, the top of the wave, the crest of the wave, rises up over the top. The water piles up over the top of the slowing water down at the seabed, and that causes the crest of the wave to rise and to steepen until eventually it becomes too tall, too steep, and it breaks. There's a couple of key terms that we need to know, and we're going to come back to in subsequent lessons when we start talking about how waves move material along a coastline, and they are swash and backwash. Hopefully stuff you remember from Key Stage 3. Swash is the movement of material up the beach, or the movement of the water up the beach, apologies. Backwash is the movement of water back down the beach due to gravity. So the swash is the force of the wave forcing water up the beach, and then the backwash is when gravity sees that water go back out to the sea. If you've ever stood and paddled at the coast, you will have felt the swash as the wave washed up over your feet, and then you would have felt the backwash as it pulled back towards the sea. So having looked at some basics to do with waves, we're now going to talk about how the sea changes the coastline. First off, waves cause erosion. Hydraulic action, abrasion and attrition are really important here. The sea will cause solution. It will dissolve soluble material from the coastline because the seawater will be slightly acidic, but due to the movement of waves, the three types of erosion that we are most interested in are hydraulic action, abrasion and attrition. This will wear away the coastline over time. The sea can also cause deposition to happen, and depending on the type of wave that's hitting a stretch of coastline, there can also be material that is deposited, and much like at the mouth of a river, deposition can cause new land to be created. Same in the sea and at our coasts. Where there is significant amounts of material being deposited, that can cause new land to build up on our coastline. Now, our coastline can experience both erosion and deposition, and which of those two processes occurs is dependent on the type of waves. If we are seeing erosion, then that coastline is being subjected to destructive waves. These are the sort of waves that we'd associate when we have storm conditions down at the coast. The waves are close together, so therefore the wave height, the wave length, sorry, is very short. The wave height is high, and the waves tend to be very steep. The breaking wave plunges down hard onto the coast, and then we see a very strong backwash pulling sand and pebbles out to sea. So we've got a wave that breaks hard onto the beach and then drags material back out to sea. These destructive waves, as I've said, typically associated with stormy conditions, but not always, they are going to result in erosion. On the other hand, we also get constructive waves. The wave crests in constructive waves are much further apart. The wave length is much longer. The wave height is much lower. They tend to be gently sloping at the wavefront. They don't crash down onto the coast. They tend to just spill onto the coast. This is the type of wave that you would go paddling in, the type of wave we associate with a calm day down at the coast. They tend to create more gentle beaches. The swash is stronger than the backwash. Now, this is not to say that these waves have as much energy as the destructive waves, but because the swash pushing material up the beach has more energy than the backwash dragging material back down the beach, it means that deposition occurs. Constructive waves construct, they create new land, so therefore deposition is occurring. What I'd like you to do is to pause and very quickly copy down this table. Don't worry if it's not hugely neat, it's just to make sure we've got an understanding of some of those basics. And then the things I want you to put in each column will come up in just a moment. So now you've got the table copied, use the following statements, put them into the correct column, constructive or destructive, and make sure they're categorized according to the different characteristics you've got in the left-hand side of your table. And here are the answers so that you can green pen your work and make sure you've got those basics covered. If you need to go back through and rewatch the video to make sure that you're confident that you know and understand the major characteristics of waves and the main differences between constructive and destructive waves, it's only a few minutes long, so feel free to go through that as many times as you need to be comfortable with it. So homework answers from last week on e-praise, go back, mark, correct, make sure you've got that done as you would in a normal week. This is a good thing to do to make sure you're reinforcing the work that you're putting in.